The stage-coach door flew open before it had even come to a complete stop, and a young woman tumbled out onto the dusty street of Laredo, Texas, her eyes wild with terror as she scrambled backward from the vehicle like something inside might follow her out. Zachary Preston watched from the general store porch where he had been loading supplies onto his wagon, his weathered hands pausing mid-motion as he took in the sight of the trembling woman pressed against the wooden sidewalk post, her breath coming in rapid, shallow gasps that he could see even from 20 feet away. The year was 1876, and Zachary had seen plenty of scared folks come through Laredo in his 32 years, but something about this woman's fear struck him differently. It was not the cautious wariness of someone traveling through unfamiliar territory, or the nervous energy of a city woman arriving in frontier country for the first time. This was raw, primal terror, the kind that came from something that had already happened, not something that might. The stagecoach driver climbed down from his seat, shaking his head as he retrieved a small carpet bag and a worn trunk from the back of the coach. He set them on the ground near the woman without a word, collected his fare from the interior passengers, and drove on without so much as a backward glance. Whatever had transpired during that journey, the driver wanted no further part of it. Zachary set down the bag of flour he had been holding and stepped off the porch, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt as he approached slowly. The woman's head snapped toward him at the noise, and he saw her entire body tense like a rabbit about to bolt. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with dark chestnut hair that had come loose from its pins during whatever ordeal she had endured. Her dress, a simple gray traveling outfit, was dusty and rumpled, and there was a tear in the sleeve that looked recent. "Madam," Zachary said softly, stopping a good 10 feet away from her. He kept his voice low and even, the same tone he used with spooked horses on his ranch. "Are you hurt?" The woman's eyes darted from his face to his hands to the street beyond him, as if cataloging every possible threat and escape route. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He noticed her hands were shaking so badly that she had to press them against her skirts to hide the tremor. "My name is Zachary Preston," he continued in that same gentle voice. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. I am not going to hurt you, and I am not going to come any closer unless you want me to." Something in his words or his tone must have reached through the fog of her fear because her breathing slowed just slightly. She swallowed hard, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Marlowe Bennett." "Miss Bennett," Zachary acknowledged with a small nod. "That is a fine name. Can you tell me what happened? Are you running from someone?" Marlowe's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her lips together hard as if physically holding back the words. Zachary noticed the way she kept glancing back at the direction the stagecoach had gone, the way her whole body remained coiled tight with tension. "I came from San Antonio," she finally managed. "My father arranged a marriage. I was traveling to meet the man, but on the coach, another passenger, he told me things. Terrible things about the man I was meant to marry, about what he did to his first wife before she died." Zachary felt a cold anger settle in his gut, though he kept it carefully hidden from his expression. "Did someone on the coach hurt you?" "No," Marlowe said quickly. "No, everyone was kind enough, but the things he told me, the details, I cannot go through with it. I cannot marry that man, but I have nowhere else to go. My father made it clear that if I did not honor this arrangement, I would no longer be welcome in his house. I have a small inheritance from my mother, but it is not enough to live on for long." She looked so small and lost standing there against that post, clutching her skirts with white-knuckled hands. Zachary thought of his own sister, who had died in childbirth 3 years ago, leaving behind a husband who mourned her still. He thought of all the women he had known who had been strong and brave and deserving of so much better than what life handed them. "The boarding house is just down the street," he said, gesturing with his head rather than his hand, keeping his movements small and non-threatening. "Mrs. Garcia, who runs it, is a good woman. She will give you a fair rate and a safe place to stay while you figure out what comes next. Would you like me to walk you there? I will stay several paces back if that would make you more comfortable." Marlowe looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, and Zachary wondered what she saw. He knew he was not much to look at, tall and rangy with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that was always a bit too long, because he only made it to the barber about once every few months. His clothes were clean but worn, practical ranch gear that had seen better days. But he kept his gaze steady and open, letting her see that he meant what he said. "Why would you help me?" she asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice, as if kindness was something unexpected and suspicious. "Because you need help," Zachary said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do. I have a mother and a younger brother back at my ranch. I would hope that if they were ever in trouble somewhere far from home, someone would show them the same courtesy." Something in Marlowe's posture eased just slightly. She looked down at her carpet bag and trunk, then back at him. "I cannot carry both." "I will get them," Zachary said. He moved slowly and deliberately, giving her time to object or move away, but she stayed where she was as he picked up both pieces of luggage. The trunk was heavier than he had expected, and he wondered what she had brought with her from her old life. They walked down the main street of Laredo together, Zachary keeping his word and staying several paces behind Marlowe. She walked quickly, her head down, as if trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. A few townspeople nodded to Zachary as they passed, and he saw the curious glances directed at his unusual companion. But no one stopped them or asked questions. The boarding house was a two-story wooden structure painted a cheerful yellow that stood out among the more weathered buildings around it. Mrs. Garcia herself was sweeping the front steps when they arrived, a round woman in her 50s with gray-streaked black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Zachary Preston," she said by way of greeting, then shifted her gaze to Marlowe. Her expression softened immediately. "And who is this poor lamb?" "Marlowe Bennett, madam," Marlowe said, her voice still quiet but steadier than before. "I need a room if you have one available." "I always have room for someone who needs it," Mrs. Garcia said firmly. She set her broom aside and came down the steps. Zachary noticed how carefully she approached Marlowe, much as he had done, and realized that Mrs. Garcia had also recognized the particular quality of fear in the young woman's bearing. "Mr. Preston was kind enough to help me with my luggage," Marlowe said, and Zachary heard the question in her voice, as if she was asking Mrs. Garcia to confirm whether he was indeed trustworthy. "Zachary is one of the good ones," Mrs. Garcia said. "He has never been anything but respectful and honest in all the years I have known him. You were fortunate that he was the one to find you." Marlowe turned to look at Zachary again, and he saw something shift in her expression. The terror was still there, hovering just beneath the surface, but there was also the faintest hint of relief. "Thank you," she said, "for your kindness." "You are welcome, Miss Bennett," Zachary replied. He set her trunk and carpet bag on the boarding house steps, then tipped his hat to both women. "I hope Laredo treats you well." He turned to go, intending to finish loading his supplies and head back to the ranch before it got too late, but Mrs. Garcia's voice stopped him. "Zachary, wait a moment." He paused and looked back. Mrs. Garcia had an arm around Marlowe's shoulders now, and the young woman was leaning into the contact slightly, as if desperate for any kind of comfort or support. "You said you were looking for someone to help with the house, did you not?" Mrs. Garcia asked. Someone to cook and clean and help care for your mother. Zachary blinked, caught off guard. He had mentioned it to Mrs. Garcia about 2 weeks ago in passing, frustrated by his inability to keep up with both the ranch work and the household duties while also making sure his mother, whose arthritis was getting worse each year, had what she needed. "Yes," he said slowly. "But I have not had any luck finding someone willing to live that far from town. Miss Bennett here was a housekeeper in San Antonio," Mrs. Garcia said, and Zachary saw Marlowe's eyes widen in surprise before she caught on to what the older woman was doing. "She is looking for respectable employment. It seems like it might be a good match if you are both willing." Marlowe looked uncertain, her earlier fear creeping back into her expression. Zachary understood. She had just met him an hour ago, and Mrs. Garcia was suggesting she go live on his isolated ranch, far from the safety of town and other people. "It would just be during the day," Zachary said quickly. "I could pick you up in the morning and bring you back to town each evening, at least until you felt comfortable staying overnight. My mother and younger brother live at the ranch too, so you would not be alone with just me. And Mrs. Garcia could check references, ask around about me, whatever you need to feel safe." "Your brother?" Marlowe asked. "How old is he?" 15, Zachary said. "His name is William. He is a good kid, helps with the horses mostly." Marlowe bit her lip, clearly torn. Zachary could see her weighing her limited options, the small inheritance that would not last long against room and board, the lack of other opportunities in a frontier town where she knew no one. "Could I think about it?" she asked finally. "Perhaps meet your mother and brother first." "Of course," Zachary said. "I come into town every Saturday for supplies. I could bring them with me this week if you would like." "That would be acceptable," Marlowe said, and Zachary caught the way she squared her shoulders slightly, as if reminding herself to be brave. "Saturday, then," he agreed. "Miss Bennett, Mrs. Garcia." He tipped his hat again and headed back to his wagon, his mind turning over this unexpected development. He had not been looking to rescue anyone today, had not expected to meet a terrified young woman fleeing from a dangerous marriage. But something about Marlowe Bennett had gotten under his skin in just those few minutes. The vulnerability in her eyes, the obvious courage it took for her to even speak to him despite her fear, the way she was trying so hard to hold herself together despite whatever horrors she had learned about the man her father had tried to sell her to like chattel. Zachary finished loading his supplies, paid his bill at the general store, and started the drive back to his ranch. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold. The land stretched out around him, vast and open, and he thought about how lonely it must feel to someone like Marlowe, who had come from a city, to be so far from civilization with only strangers for company. His ranch, the Preston Ranch as it had been known since his father started it 30 years ago, came into view as he crested a low hill. The main house was a sturdy structure built from local stone and timber, weathered but well maintained. The barn and outbuildings were in similar condition, showing the signs of hard use but also regular care. His small herd of cattle dotted the grassland beyond, and he could see his brother William working with one of the horses in the corral. His mother, Sarah Preston, came out onto the porch as he pulled the wagon up to the house. She moved slowly, favoring her right side where the arthritis was worst, but her smile was warm and genuine. "You were gone longer than usual," she observed as Zachary began unloading supplies. "Met someone in town," Zachary said. He carried a crate of goods into the house, his mother following behind. A young woman who just arrived on the stage. She was in a bad way, running from an arranged marriage to a man who apparently did something terrible to his first wife. Sarah's expression turned serious. Poor thing. Where is she now? Mrs. Garcia's boarding house, Zachary said. He set the crate on the kitchen table and turned to face his mother. Mrs. Garcia suggested she might be interested in the housekeeping position. I told her I would bring you and William into town on Saturday so she could meet you both before deciding. That is very sensible, Sarah said. She studied her son's face with the keen insight that only mothers possess. What is she like? Zachary thought about how to answer that. Scared, he said finally. Brave too, though. She is trying hard not to fall apart. Her name is Marlowe Bennett. She is from San Antonio. And you want to help her, Sarah said. It was not a question. I do, Zachary admitted. Maybe that is foolish. I do not know anything about her really. But mother, you should have seen her face. She looked like a hunted animal. I could not just walk away from that. Sarah reached out and patted her son's arm gently. You have always had a good heart, Zachary. It is one of the things your father loved most about you. If this young woman needs help and we can provide it, then we should. William came in then, dusty from working with the horses, and Zachary explained the situation again. His younger brother, who had their father's easy temperament and their mother's quick smile, nodded thoughtfully. So we are going into town on Saturday, William asked. I could use some new gloves. Mine are about worn through. We can do that, Zachary agreed. But the main purpose is to meet Miss Bennett so she can decide if she wants to work here. I will be on my best behavior, William promised with a grin. No mud, no cursing, no horse manure on my boots. That would be appreciated, Sarah said dryly, but she was smiling. The rest of the week passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Zachary rose before dawn each day to tend to the cattle and horses, mended fences, checked the water sources, and handled the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. But in the quiet moments, often late at night before sleep took him, his thoughts drifted back to Marlowe Bennett. He wondered how she was settling in at the boarding house, whether her fear had eased at all, whether she had decided to take the risk of working for him. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for the ride into town. Zachary hitched up the wagon while William helped their mother down the porch steps. Sarah had dressed in her best day dress, a practical blue cotton that brought out her still bright eyes, and had insisted that both her sons wear their cleanest shirts and pants. We want to make a good impression, she said firmly when William had grumbled about the extra effort. This poor girl has been through an ordeal. The least we can do is show her that we are respectable people. The ride to Laredo took about an hour at an easy pace. They passed several other ranches along the way, exchanging waves with neighbors working their land. The town was busier than usual when they arrived, as Saturdays always drew people from the surrounding area for supplies and socializing. Zachary pulled the wagon up in front of Mrs. Garcia's boarding house and helped his mother down. William tied off the horses, and the three of them made their way up the front steps together. Mrs. Garcia answered Zachary's knock almost immediately, as if she had been watching for them. Right on time, she said approvingly. Miss Bennett is in the sitting room. She has been quite nervous all morning. That is understandable, Sarah said. We are strangers to her, and she is considering trusting us with her safety. Mrs. Garcia led them through the entry hall to a comfortable sitting room furnished with several chairs and a worn sofa. Marlowe stood by the window, her posture rigid with tension. She had changed since Zachary had last seen her, now wearing a simple dark green dress that fit her properly, and her hair was neatly pinned up. But the fear in her eyes was the same, that deep wariness that made Zachary's chest ache. Miss Bennett, he said softly, and she turned to face them. I would like you to meet my mother, Sarah Preston, and my brother, William. "It is a pleasure to meet you both," Marlowe said. Her voice was quiet but steady, and Zachary gave her credit for maintaining her composure despite her obvious anxiety. Sarah moved forward slowly, giving Marlowe time to adjust to her presence. "The pleasure is ours, dear. Zachary told us about your situation. I want you to know that if you decide to work for us, we will do everything in our power to make sure you feel safe and comfortable." "Thank you," Marlowe said. She looked at William, who gave her a friendly smile. "I mostly stay out in the barn and corral with the horses," he said, "so you would not have to see much of me if you did not want to. Though Mother makes the best biscuits, and if you could learn to make them like she does, that would be grand." Despite herself, Marlowe's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "I am a decent cook. I worked in my uncle's household for 2 years before he passed away." "Why do you not sit down?" Mrs. Garcia suggested. "I will bring some coffee and you can all get to know each other properly." They settled into the sitting room, Marlowe perching on the edge of the sofa like she might need to bolt at any moment, while Zachary and his family took the chairs across from her. Mrs. Garcia brought coffee and some sweet rolls, then tactfully left them alone. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Bennett," Sarah said. "The ranch is isolated. Our nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. If something were to happen, if you needed help, it would take time for anyone to reach us. I tell you this not to frighten you, but because you deserve to know what you would be agreeing to." Marlowe nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Mrs. Preston. Can I ask you a question?" "Of course, dear." "Your son, Zachary, he seems like a good man. But I have been taught that seeming and being are not always the same thing. Will you tell me truthfully what kind of man he is?" Sarah glanced at Zachary, who kept his expression neutral, understanding that Marlowe needed this reassurance from someone other than him. His mother turned back to Marlowe and spoke with quiet conviction. "My husband died 5 years ago," Sarah said. "A ranching accident. Zachary was only 27, and suddenly he was responsible for this entire ranch, for supporting William and me, for keeping his father's legacy alive. It would have broken a lesser man, that kind of pressure and grief. But Zachary, he stood up under it. He works harder than any 2 men I know. He has never raised his hand or his voice in anger to either William or me. He goes to church when he can, helps neighbors who need it, and treats everyone from the wealthiest rancher to the poorest drifter with the same respect." She paused, then added, "But more than that, he is gentle. He has always been gentle, even as a boy. He was the one who would bring home injured animals and nurse them back to health. He cried when his father died, was not ashamed of his tears. He reads poetry sometimes in the evenings, did you know that? Keeps a book of Whitman on his nightstand. That is the kind of man my son is, Miss Bennett. The kind who understands that strength and gentleness are not opposites, but companions." Marlowe's eyes had filled with tears, and she blinked them back rapidly. Zachary felt his throat tighten at his mother's words, humbled by her faith in him. "What happened to you, Miss Bennett?" William asked suddenly. I know it is none of my business, but what did that man do that scared you so much?" "William," Zachary said sharply, but Marlowe held up a hand. "No, it is all right. He deserves to know if I am going to be working in his home." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "The man my father arranged for me to marry, his name is Victor Harrington. He is wealthy, well-connected, and by all appearances a gentleman. But on the stagecoach, a traveling preacher who had ministered in the town where Harrington lives told me the truth. Harrington's first wife died under suspicious circumstances. She fell down the stairs, supposedly. But the preacher said everyone in town knew Harrington beat her. That he isolated her from her family and friends. That the servants heard her screaming behind closed doors. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He said the wife tried to leave once, but Harrington found her and dragged her back, and after that, she never left the house again until they carried her out in a coffin. The preacher told me I should run, that he could not in good conscience let me walk into that situation without knowing. So I did. I ran. The room was silent for a long moment. Zachary felt that cold anger from before settle back into his gut, stronger now. He thought about what might have happened to Marlowe if that preacher had not spoken up, if she had arrived at Harrington's home with no idea of the danger she was in. "Your father knew about this?" Sarah asked, her own voice tight with anger. "I do not think so," Marlowe said. "At least, I hope not. I think he just saw the financial opportunity and did not look any deeper. He has been struggling since some investments went bad. I think Harrington offered enough money that my father did not ask the questions he should have." "Then you are well rid of him too," William said bluntly. "Sorry, Miss Bennett, but what kind of father sells off his daughter like that?" "William," Sarah said again, but there was less reprimand in her tone this time. "He is not wrong," Marlowe said softly. "I have been thinking the same thing all week. My mother would be ashamed of him if she were still alive." Zachary leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Miss Bennett, if you come work for us, I give you my word that we will protect you. If Harrington or your father or anyone else comes looking for you, they will have to go through me first. And I do not intend to be easy to go through." Marlowe looked at him, really looked at him, and Zachary held her gaze steadily. He wanted her to see that he meant every word, that this was not just empty chivalry but a genuine promise. "Why?" she asked, echoing her question from their first meeting. "Why would you put yourself at risk for someone you barely know?" "Because it is right," Zachary said simply. "And because no one should have to live in fear the way you have been living. You deserve better than that." Something broke in Marlowe then, some dam that had been holding back the weight of everything she had been through. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. Sarah immediately moved to sit beside her on the sofa, putting an arm around her shoulders and making soothing sounds. "Let it out, dear," she said gently. "You have been so brave holding it all in. Let it out." Marlowe sobbed into Sarah's shoulder, and Zachary exchanged a glance with William, who looked uncomfortable the way young men often do when confronted with tears. They sat quietly, giving Marlowe the space to release her fear and grief and relief, until finally her crying subsided into occasional hiccups. "I am so sorry," Marlowe said, pulling back and wiping at her face with her hands. "That was inappropriate." "Nonsense," Sarah said firmly. She produced a handkerchief from her sleeve and handed it to Marlowe. "Tears are never inappropriate when they are needed. You have been carrying a heavy burden, and sometimes our bodies need to release that weight." Marlowe wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. When she looked up at Zachary again, something in her expression had changed. The terror was still there, but it was no longer the only thing he saw. There was also hope, fragile and tentative but real. "I would like to accept your offer of employment," she said, "if it is still available." "It is," Zachary confirmed. "When would you like to start? Would Monday be acceptable? That would give me time to settle my bill with Mrs. Garcia and prepare myself." "Monday is perfect," Sarah said. "Zachary can pick you up in the morning, say around 7. We have breakfast at 6:30, so you would arrive in time to help with the midday meal." "That sounds wonderful," Marlowe said. She looked around at all three of them, her expression still cautious but warming. "Thank you, all of you. I do not know how I can ever repay this kindness." "You can repay it by being happy," William said, "and by learning to make those biscuits I mentioned." This time Marlowe's smile reached her eyes just for a moment, and Zachary felt something shift in his chest. He told himself it was just satisfaction at having helped someone in need, at having done the right thing. But there was something else there too, something he was not quite ready to examine too closely. They spent another hour at the boarding house, discussing practical matters like wages and duties, and what Marlowe should expect from ranch life. Sarah and Marlowe got along well, talking about recipes and household management, and Zachary found himself content to mostly listen, interjecting only when asked about the ranch's layout or his preferences for meals. As they were preparing to leave, Marlowe walked them to the door. She paused before opening it, turning to face Zachary. "Thank you," she said again, her voice soft but clear, "for speaking gently when you found me. I was so frightened and you made me feel like maybe everything would be all right. I will not forget that." "You are welcome, Miss Bennett," Zachary replied. He wanted to say more, wanted to promise her that he would never give her reason to be afraid of him, that he would spend every day proving himself worthy of the trust she was placing in him. But he settled for a simple nod and a sincere smile, not wanting to overwhelm her with too much intensity. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. It was William who finally broke the silence about halfway home. "She seems nice," he said. "Scared, but nice." "I hope she likes it at the ranch." "So do I," Sarah agreed. She glanced at Zachary, who was driving the wagon with his gaze focused on the road ahead. "What do you think, Zachary?" "I think we need to make sure she feels safe," Zachary said. "That has to be the priority, at least at first. She has been through something traumatic, even if the physical threat was more potential than actual. That kind of fear does not go away quickly." "You will be good for her," Sarah said with confidence. "You have always had a gift for gentleness." Zachary did not respond, but he thought about those words as they completed the journey home. He thought about Marlowe's trembling hands and frightened eyes, about the courage it must have taken for her to step off that stage coach into an unknown town with no plan and no support. He thought about the way she had finally smiled at William's comment about biscuits, how that smile had transformed her face for just a moment. He wanted to see her smile like that more often. He wanted to be the kind of person who made her feel safe enough to let down her guard, to laugh and relax and be herself without fear. It was a strange feeling, this protective instinct coupled with genuine curiosity about who Marlowe Bennett really was beneath the layers of fear and survival mode. Monday morning arrived with a sky full of threatening clouds that promised rain later in the day. Zachary rose even earlier than usual to make sure all the morning chores were done before he needed to leave for town. He washed more carefully than he usually did for a workday, changing into clean clothes and even running a comb through his hair, which earned him a knowing look from his mother that he chose to ignore. The ride into Laredo seemed to take longer than usual, though Zachary knew it was just his own impatience making it feel that way. He found himself nervous, worried that Marlowe might have changed her mind over the weekend, that her fear might have convinced her that going to an isolated ranch with virtual strangers was too risky. But when he arrived at the boarding house, Mrs. Garcia was already standing on the porch with Marlowe beside her. Marlowe had a small bag in her hands and was wearing a practical brown dress with a white apron over it. She looked pale but determined. "Good morning, Mr. Preston," Mrs. Garcia said. "Miss Bennett is all ready for her first day." "Good morning," Zachary replied, climbing down from the wagon. He approached slowly, noting the way Marlowe's grip tightened on her bag as he got closer. "Good morning, Miss Bennett. Are you ready?" "I think so," Marlowe said, "though I confess I am a bit nervous." "That is perfectly natural," Zachary said. He gestured to the wagon. "I brought extra blankets in case you get cold on the ride, and I will drive carefully. The roads can be rough." He helped Marlowe up onto the wagon seat, careful to only touch her hand as briefly as necessary and giving her plenty of space once she was settled. He tucked one of the blankets around her lap, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "You take care of her, Zachary Preston, Mrs. Garcia called as they started off. "And Miss Bennett, you send word if you need anything at all." "I will, thank you," Marlowe called back. The first 15 minutes of the ride passed in awkward silence. Zachary kept his attention on the road and the horses, acutely aware of Marlowe sitting tensely beside him. Finally, desperate to ease the tension, he decided to talk to her the way he had that first day, with a calm and steady voice that demanded nothing from her. "The ranch has been in my family for 30 years, he said conversationally. "My father bought the land when there was nothing but open prairie. He built the house himself, with help from neighbors, and started with just 20 head of cattle. By the time he died, we had over 200 head and one of the best herds in the area." He paused, then continued. "He was a good man, my father, strong but kind. He used to say that the land would teach you everything you needed to know about life if you paid attention. Patience, hard work, respect for things bigger than yourself." "You miss him," Marlowe said softly. "Every day," Zachary admitted. "But I am glad I had him for as long as I did. Not everyone gets a father worth missing." He felt Marlowe glance at him, but he kept his eyes on the road. After a moment, she spoke again. "My father was not always like he is now. When my mother was alive, he was warmer, laughed more, but after she died, it was like something in him shut down. He became focused only on money and status, on climbing back up to where we had been before his investments failed." "I am sorry," Zachary said. "It must have been difficult to lose both your mother and the father you knew." "It was," Marlowe said. She was quiet for another moment, then asked, "What is your ranch like? Mrs. Preston described it, but I would like to hear it from you." Zachary smiled slightly. "It is beautiful," he said simply. "At least, I think so. The house sits on a small rise so you can see for miles in every direction. In spring, wildflowers cover the grasslands in every color you can imagine. We have a creek that runs through the property, never goes dry even in the hottest summers. The cattle graze on the south pastures mostly, and we keep the horses closer to the house. William has a gift with them. He can gentle even the most skittish horse given enough time." "It sounds peaceful," Marlowe said. "It can be," Zachary agreed. "It is also hard work and lonely sometimes, but yes, there is a peace to it, a sense of being part of something larger, if that makes sense." "It does," Marlowe said, and when Zachary glanced over at her, he saw that some of the tension had eased from her shoulders. They talked on and off for the rest of the ride, Zachary keeping the conversation light and undemanding. He pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the area, and asked gentle questions about her own life that she could answer or ignore as she chose. By the time they crested the rise that revealed the ranch spread out below them, Marlowe had relaxed enough that she was sitting back against the seat instead of perched on its edge. "Oh," she breathed, taking in the view. "You were right. It is beautiful." Zachary felt an absurd rush of pride, as if her approval of his land somehow mattered more than it should. "Welcome to Preston Ranch," he said. Sarah and William came out to greet them as Zachary pulled the wagon up to the house. William immediately took charge of the horses, giving Marlowe a friendly wave before leading the team toward the barn. Sarah approached the wagon more slowly, smiling up at Marlowe. "Welcome, dear," she said warmly. "How was the drive?" "Lovely, thank you," Marlowe replied. She accepted Zachary's hand as he helped her down from the wagon, and he noticed that her grip was steadier than it had been that morning, her fingers not trembling quite so much. Sarah gave Marlowe a tour of the house, while Zachary went to help William with the horses. His brother shot him a curious look as they worked. She seems less scared than on Saturday, William observed. She is still scared, Zachary corrected, but maybe starting to trust a little. We need to be careful not to do anything that might set her back. I will be good, William promised. No roughhousing, no loud noises, no surprising her. Thank you, Zachary said. He clapped his brother on the shoulder affectionately. You are a good kid, you know that, William grinned. Mother says I get it from you. When the brothers returned to the house, they found Sarah and Marlowe in the kitchen. Marlowe had tied on her apron and was listening intently as Sarah explained where everything was kept and how the stove worked. She looked up when Zachary and William entered, and Zachary thought he saw the tiniest hint of a smile. Your mother has been very helpful, Marlowe said. I think I am starting to get the hang of things. Good, Zachary said. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, making sure to choose the seat farthest from where Marlowe was standing. We usually have coffee around mid-morning. Would you like some? I can make it, Marlowe said quickly. You are still learning where everything is, Sarah said gently. Why do you not sit and have some with us? We can talk about what you would like to prepare for the midday meal. They spent a pleasant hour around the kitchen table, sipping coffee and discussing meal plans. Marlowe gradually became more animated as the conversation continued, offering her own suggestions and asking questions about their preferences. Zachary found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way her hands moved when she talked, the slight accent in her voice that spoke of her San Antonio upbringing, the intelligence in her eyes when she listened. He caught himself staring at one point and forced his attention back to his coffee cup, but not before William noticed and gave him a subtle smirk. Zachary shot his brother a warning look that only made William's grin widen. The rest of that first day passed smoothly. Marlowe threw herself into her work with a dedication that Zachary found admirable, preparing a midday meal of beef stew and cornbread that had William praising her cooking skills enthusiastically. She cleaned the kitchen until it sparkled, helped Sarah with some mending, and generally made herself useful in a dozen different ways. Zachary made a point of being around but not intrusive, working on ranch accounts at the table while Marlowe cooked, fixing a loose hinge on a cabinet door, bringing in firewood for the stove. He wanted her to get used to his presence, to see that he was not a threat, while also respecting her need for space. As the afternoon wore on and it came time for him to take her back to town, Marlowe surprised him by seeming almost reluctant to leave. Thank you for today, she told Sarah as she removed her apron. It was nice to feel useful again. You were more than useful, dear, Sarah said warmly. You were wonderful. I hope you will come back tomorrow, of course, Marlowe said. She looked around the kitchen with an expression that Zachary could not quite read. This feels like a real home. It has been a long time since I was in a place that felt like that. On the drive back to Laredo, Marlowe was more talkative than she had been that morning. She asked Zachary about the cattle operation, about William's horse training, about what winters were like on the ranch. He answered her questions patiently, pleased that she felt comfortable enough to be curious. I was wondering, Marlowe said as they neared town. Your mother mentioned you come to town for church sometimes. Would it be all right if I attended with you? I have been staying away from public places mostly, worried that someone might recognize me or that word might get back to my father or to Mr. Harrington, but I miss it. Of course, Zachary said. We usually go every other week depending on the weather and ranch needs. This Sunday we were planning to attend. You would be welcome to join us. Thank you, Marlowe said. She was quiet for a moment, then added softly, You know, when I got off that stagecoach last week, I truly thought my life was over. I could not see any path forward that did not involve fear or poverty or both. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe there is still hope for something better. Zachary's throat felt tight. There is always hope, Miss Bennett. Sometimes it is just harder to see than others. That night, as Zachary lay in bed listening to the wind pick up outside, he thought about Marlowe's words. He thought about the fear in her eyes that first day and the tentative trust he had seen growing throughout today. He thought about the way she had looked at the ranch when they first arrived, with wonder and something that might have been longing. And he thought about the strange feeling in his chest every time she smiled, every time she let her guard down just a little bit more. It was too soon to call it anything significant, too soon to even acknowledge what it might be. But it was there nonetheless, this growing warmth, this desire to know her better and protect her and make her happy. Zachary had not expected to feel this way. He had been content with his life, busy enough with the ranch and his family that he had not felt the lack of romance particularly keenly. But now, having met Marlowe, he realized that maybe he had been lonely without knowing it. Maybe there had been a space in his life that he had not noticed until someone perfectly shaped to fill it had appeared. It was a dangerous thought, he knew. Marlowe was vulnerable and scared, in no position to be thinking about romance even if she were inclined to consider him that way. His job was to help her heal, to provide a safe space where she could rebuild her confidence and figure out what she wanted from her life. His own feelings, whatever they might be growing into, had to come second to that. But as he drifted off to sleep, Zachary could not help but hope that maybe, eventually, when Marlowe was ready, there might be room for something more between them. For now, though, he would be patient. He would speak softly and move carefully and give her all the time she needed. Because that was what she deserved, and Zachary had meant every word when he said he wanted to be the kind of man who made her feel safe. The days settled into a rhythm. Every morning, Zachary would drive into Laredo to collect Marlowe from the boarding house, and every evening he would take her back. In between, Marlowe worked in the house, gradually taking over more of the cooking and cleaning from Sarah, whose arthritis made such tasks increasingly difficult. But it was more than just work. Over meals and in the quiet moments of the day, Marlowe slowly began to open up. She talked about her mother, who had been a gentle soul with a love for music and had taught Marlowe to play piano before she died. She talked about her childhood in San Antonio, the friends she had left behind when her father's financial troubles made their social circle shrink. She talked, haltingly at first but with growing confidence, about the fear that still woke her in the night sometimes. The nightmares where Victor Harrington found her or her father dragged her back to fulfill the marriage contract. Sarah and Zachary listened without judgment, offering comfort and reassurance, and gradually, those conversations seemed to help ease Marlowe's burden. Zachary, for his part, shared stories of his own life. He told her about his father's death, about the grief and responsibility that had nearly crushed him. He talked about the satisfaction of watching the ranch thrive under his stewardship, about the deep connection he felt to the land. He even, one evening, mentioned the book of Whitman poetry that his mother had told Marlowe about and offered to loan it to her if she was interested. "I would like that," Marlowe had said, her eyes lighting up. "My mother loved poetry. She used to read to me before bed." The next day, Zachary brought the book and handed it to her almost shyly. Marlowe handled it like something precious, running her fingers over the worn cover with reverence. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said softly. "I will take good care of it." "I know you will," Zachary replied, and the smile she gave him in return made his heart skip in a way that was becoming increasingly familiar. Sunday came, and Zachary brought the whole family into town early for church services. Marlowe was waiting on the boarding house porch, dressed in a modest blue dress that brought out the warm tones in her hair. She still looked nervous about being in public, but she held her head high as she joined them. The small church in Laredo was packed, as it usually was on Sundays. Zachary noticed several curious glances directed at their group, people clearly wondering about the young woman accompanying the Preston family. He positioned himself strategically between Marlowe and most of the congregation, using his height to give her a bit of privacy. And she gave him a grateful look that told him she understood what he was doing. The service itself was simple but moving, with hymns sung by the whole congregation and a sermon about compassion and helping those in need. Zachary saw Marlowe's eyes fill with tears during one particularly poignant hymn, and Sarah reached over to squeeze her hand gently. After the service, several people approached to meet Marlowe. Mrs. Garcia was there, of course, and introduced Marlowe to a few other women in town, describing her as the Preston family's new housekeeper. Most people were friendly and welcoming, though Zachary noticed a few who looked at Marlowe with suspicion, wondering about her background and her sudden appearance in Laredo. One man in particular caught Zachary's attention. Harold Mitchell was a successful rancher from the other side of town, wealthy and influential, but also known for being nosy and judgmental. He approached their group with a sharp look in his eye. "Preston," Mitchell said by way of greeting, "I hear you have taken on new help." "Word travels fast," Zachary said neutrally. "Small town," Mitchell replied. He looked Marlowe up and down in a way that made Zachary's jaw tighten. "Where are you from, miss?" "San Antonio," Marlowe said, her voice steady despite the way her hands clenched in her skirts. "What brings you to Laredo?" Mitchell pressed. "That is her business, Harold," Sarah interjected, her tone brooking no argument. "And I suggest you remember your manners." Mitchell's eyebrows rose, but he backed off slightly. "Just looking out for the community, Sarah. We all know how important it is to know who is living among us." "Miss Bennett is a respectable young woman in need of honest work," Zachary said, his voice calm but edged with warning. "That is all anyone needs to know." Mitchell looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Zachary's expression made him think better of it. He nodded curtly and moved on, but not before casting one more suspicious glance at Marlowe. "Ignore him," William said once Mitchell was out of earshot. "He thinks he is the town sheriff, but really he is just a busybody." "William," Sarah chided, but there was no real heat in it. Marlowe let out a shaky breath. "I should have expected questions. I am sorry if my presence here causes problems for your family." "You have nothing to apologize for," Zachary said firmly. "And Mitchell does not speak for this town. Most people here are good, kind folks who mind their own business and help their neighbors. Do not let one suspicious old man color your view of the whole community." They had lunch at the small restaurant in town, a treat that Sarah said was to celebrate Marlowe's successful first week. Over fried chicken and potatoes, the conversation flowed easily, with William entertaining them with stories about his latest horse training projects, and Sarah sharing town gossip in a way that was informative rather than mean-spirited. Zachary mostly listened, content to watch Marlowe gradually relax as the meal went on. She laughed at William's jokes, asked Sarah questions about various townspeople, and even made a few witty observations of her own. It was like watching a flower slowly open, and Zachary found himself transfixed by the transformation. As they were leaving the restaurant, they ran into the traveling preacher who had warned Marlowe about Victor Harrington. He was an older man with kind eyes and silver hair, dressed in simple but clean clothing. His face lit up when he saw Marlowe. "Miss Bennett," he said warmly, "I have been hoping I would see you again. I was worried about what became of you after you left the stagecoach." "Reverend Parker," Marlowe said, and Zachary could hear the emotion in her voice. "I cannot thank you enough for your warning. You may have saved my life." "I only told you the truth that needed telling," Parker said. He looked at Zachary and the others curiously, and Marlowe quickly made introductions. "The Prestons have been very kind to me," she explained. "They gave me work and have made me feel safe for the first time in weeks." Parker studied Zachary for a long moment, then nodded with evident satisfaction. "I am glad to hear it. When I saw you run from that coach, I prayed that God would put good people in your path. It seems he answered that prayer." They talked for a few more minutes, Parker explaining that he was traveling through the area ministering to various small communities. Before he left, he blessed Marlowe and reminded her that she had been brave to trust her instincts and escape a dangerous situation. "Never doubt that you made the right choice," he told her. "Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing." On the drive back to the ranch that afternoon, Marlowe was quiet but not in the tense, frightened way she had been at first. This was a thoughtful, peaceful quiet, and Zachary left her to her contemplations until she was ready to speak. "I think I would like to accept your mother's offer," Marlowe said finally as they neared the ranch. Zachary glanced at her, not understanding. "What offer?" "She suggested last week that once I felt comfortable, I might consider staying at the ranch instead of going back and forth to town every day. She said there is a small room off the kitchen that used to be a pantry, but could easily be converted into living quarters." Marlowe twisted her hands in her lap nervously. "I know it is a big step, and I do not want to presume, but the truth is that I feel safer here than I do in town. And it would be more practical, would it not? No wasted time on travel." Zachary's heart was beating faster than it should, and he forced himself to think practically. "Are you sure? It would mean being quite isolated. If something happened, if you needed to get away quickly, it would be harder than in town." "I know," Marlowe said. She met his eyes directly, and he saw determination in her gaze. "But I trust you, Mr. Preston. All of you. I do not know when that happened exactly, when I stopped being quite so afraid all the time, but it did. And I would like to be part of this place, really part of it, not just visiting every day." "Then we would be honored to have you," Zachary said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "When would you like to move your things? Would next week be too soon?" "Next week would be perfect." That evening, as Zachary completed his final chores of the day, he found himself filled with a strange mix of emotions. Happiness that Marlowe was staying, that she felt safe enough to take that leap. Anticipation at the thought of seeing her every day, not just during work hours but in the casual moments of ranch life. But also a growing fear of his own, because his feelings for her were becoming impossible to ignore. He had fallen for her, he realized. Somewhere between that first day when she had trembled with fear outside the stagecoach and today when she had smiled over lunch and decided to trust them with her safety, Zachary Preston had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Marlowe Bennett. It was terrifying in its own way. He had never felt quite like this before. This consuming desire to be near someone, to make them happy, to build a life with them. And the timing was terrible because Marlowe was still healing, still figuring out who she was outside of fear and obligation. The last thing she needed was romantic pressure from the man who was supposed to be providing her with safe haven. So Zachary resolved to keep his feelings to himself, at least for now. He would continue to be kind and patient and respectful. He would give Marlowe space to heal and grow and discover what she wanted from life. And if, eventually, she decided she might want to explore something more with him, well, he would be there, waiting. Because Marlowe was worth waiting for. The following week passed in a flurry of activity as they prepared the small room for Marlowe's occupancy. It had indeed been used for storage, filled with old farm equipment and preserved goods. Zachary and William cleared it out, scrubbed the walls and floor, and gave it a fresh coat of whitewash. Sarah contributed a simple bed frame, a small dresser, and cheerful curtains she had been saving. By the time they finished, the room was modest but cozy, with a window that looked out over the eastern pastures where the sunrise would stream in each morning. On Saturday, Zachary brought the wagon into town to collect not just Marlowe but all her belongings. Mrs. Garcia was there to see her off, hugging Marlowe tightly and making her promise to visit regularly. "You have come such a long way in just 2 weeks, Mrs. Garcia said, holding Marlowe at arm's length to look at her properly. "When you first arrived, you could barely speak without shaking. Now look at you, moving to a ranch, starting a new life. I am so proud of you, dear girl." "I could not have done it without you," Marlowe said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a place to land when I had nowhere else to go. And now the Prestons are giving you a place to grow," Mrs. Garcia replied. She looked at Zachary over Marlowe's shoulder. "You take care of our girl, Zachary Preston." "I intend to," Zachary promised. The drive back to the ranch felt different this time, charged with new significance. This was not just another work day, but the beginning of something more permanent. Marlowe seemed to feel it too because she was quieter than usual, though not with fear. There was an air of anticipation about her, of someone standing on the brink of a new chapter. When they arrived at the ranch, Sarah and William were waiting with lunch already prepared. They spent the afternoon helping Marlowe unpack and settle into her new room, making sure she had everything she needed. William brought in an extra lamp for reading. Sarah provided fresh linens, and Zachary hung a small mirror on the wall and made sure the window opened and closed smoothly. That evening, they all sat together on the front porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. Marlowe sat in the rocking chair that had been Sarah's, with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill, looking more at peace than Zachary had ever seen her. "Thank you," she said softly, "all of you, for giving me this chance, this home. I do not have the words to properly express what it means." "You do not need fancy words," Sarah said gently. "We can see it in your face, dear. That is thanks enough." As the stars began to appear overhead, Zachary found himself thinking about the future in ways he had not in years. He had been content to simply maintain what his father had built, to take care of his family and his land without looking much beyond the daily responsibilities. But now, with Marlowe here, he found himself imagining what might be possible. He pictured her still sitting in that rocking chair years from now, but relaxed and smiling, free of all fear. He pictured her becoming a permanent part of this family in every sense of the word. He pictured children, perhaps, running through these fields while Marlowe watched from the porch with that gentle smile she was developing. It was a beautiful vision, and Zachary held it close to his heart even as he reminded himself not to push, not to rush. Good things, his father used to say, came to those who had patience and faith. Zachary had both in abundance when it came to Marlowe. The weeks that followed were perhaps the happiest Zachary could remember since before his father died. The ranch felt complete in a way it had not in years, with Marlowe's presence bringing warmth and life to the house. She proved to be an excellent cook, her meals varying and delicious. She kept the house spotless without making anyone feel uncomfortable about it, finding ways to clean around their daily activities rather than disrupting them. But more than her practical contributions, Marlowe brought joy. She sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and the sound of her voice drifting through the house made everyone smile. She drew out William's more thoughtful side. asking him questions about his dreams for the future and actually listening to his answers in a way that made the teenager open up. She and Sarah developed a close bond, often sitting together in the evenings mending or knitting, talking about everything and nothing. And with Zachary, she developed something harder to define. They talked constantly, finding endless topics of conversation from the mundane to the philosophical. They worked side by side sometimes, Marlowe helping with smaller ranch tasks while Zachary taught her about cattle and horses and the rhythms of ranch life. There was an ease between them that felt natural and right, a comfort level that went beyond employer and employee or even just friends. Zachary found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to make her laugh, to see that smile that grew more frequent with each passing day. And he noticed, with a hope he tried not to let overwhelm him, that Marlowe seemed to seek out his company too. She would bring coffee out to wherever he was working, staying to chat. She asked his opinion on household matters even when he suspected she already knew the answer. She sat next to him at meals and on the porch in the evenings, close enough that their shoulders sometimes brushed. A month after Marlowe moved to the ranch, Zachary was in the barn repairing some tack when she appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the afternoon sun. She stood there for a moment, seemingly hesitant, before stepping inside. "Can I help?" she asked. "It is not glamorous work," Zachary warned, holding up the bridle he was oiling. "Just maintenance." "I do not mind," Marlowe said. She came and sat on the bench beside him, picking up a cloth and reaching for another piece of tack. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Marlowe spoke again. "I have been thinking," she said quietly, "about how different my life is now compared to what it might have been. If I had gone through with the marriage, if that preacher had not warned me, I would be with Victor Harrington right now, trapped in that house, probably already bearing the bruises that would lead to my eventual death." Zachary's hand stilled on the leather. "You do not need to think about that. It did not happen." "I know," Marlowe said, "but I cannot help wondering sometimes why I was spared that fate. What did I do to deserve this kindness instead of that cruelty? It seems so arbitrary, like the universe flipped a coin and I happened to land on the good side." "It was not arbitrary," Zachary said firmly. He set down the bridle and turned to face her fully. "You were brave enough to listen when someone warned you of danger. You were strong enough to walk away from everything familiar because you trusted your instincts. And you were open enough to accept help when it was offered instead of trying to struggle through alone. Those were choices you made, Marlowe. You saved yourself. We just provided the tools." Marlowe's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I do not feel very brave most of the time. I still wake up frightened some nights, convinced that someone is going to drag me away from here. I still flinch at loud noises and unexpected movements." "How is that brave?" "Because you keep going anyway," Zachary said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. She did not pull away. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Marlowe. It is feeling the fear and choosing to live your life anyway. And you do that every single day." A single tear slipped down Marlowe's cheek, and without thinking, Zachary reached up and brushed it away with his thumb. The moment felt suspended, charged with something unspoken, and he saw Marlowe's breath catch as their eyes met. "Zachary," she whispered, and there was something in the way she said his name, something vulnerable and hopeful and questioning all at once. He wanted to kiss her. God, how he wanted to kiss her, to pull her close and tell her everything he had been feeling for weeks now. But he remembered his promise to himself, to give her space and time, and he forced himself to pull back gently. "You are an extraordinary woman, Marlowe Bennett," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Do not ever doubt that." He stood then, needing to put some distance between them before he did something foolish and made an excuse about checking on the cattle. As he left the barn, he thought he heard Marlowe whisper something, but he was not close enough to make out the words. That night, Zachary lay awake for a long time, replaying that moment in the barn. The look in Marlowe's eyes, the way she had said his name, the fact that she had not pulled away from his touch. Was it possible that she felt something for him too? Or was he reading too much into simple gratitude and growing trust? He was still wrestling with these questions when he finally fell into a restless sleep, and they followed him into his dreams. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the county fair that was being held in Laredo. Sarah had been talking about it all week, excited about entering some of her preserves in the competition and eager for a day of socializing and entertainment. Zachary had agreed to take the family into town, and Marlowe had seemed excited at the prospect of her first real social event since arriving in Laredo. They all dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. Zachary wore clean black trousers and a crisp white shirt, foregoing his usual work clothes for something more presentable. William had actually combed his hair without being asked, and Sarah wore her best Sunday dress. But it was Marlowe who took Zachary's breath away when she emerged from her room. She wore a pale yellow dress he had never seen before, one she had been saving for a special occasion. It brought out the gold highlights in her hair and made her skin glow. She had arranged her hair in an elegant style that framed her face beautifully, and there was a confidence in her bearing that had not been there even a week ago. "You look lovely," Sarah said warmly. "Prettiest girl at the fair," William agreed with his usual lack of subtlety. Marlowe blushed but smiled, then looked at Zachary. "Is it too much?" "It is perfect," Zachary managed, hoping his voice sounded normal. "You look beautiful, Marlowe." The blush deepened, but Marlowe's smile grew wider. They loaded into the wagon, with Zachary helping both women up before climbing into the driver's seat. The drive to town was filled with excited chatter about what they hoped to see at the fair, what competitions might be happening, what food vendors would be present. The Laredo County Fair was the social event of the season, drawing people from all the surrounding ranches and towns. The main street had been transformed with colorful bunting and banners, and temporary booths lined both sides selling everything from baked goods to handmade crafts. A makeshift stage had been erected at one end for performances, and the smell of roasting meat and sweet pastries filled the air. Zachary kept close to Marlowe as they navigated through the crowds, acutely aware of how overwhelming this might be for someone who had been avoiding public spaces. But Marlowe seemed to be handling it well, her eyes bright with interest as she took in all the sights and sounds. They stopped at various booths, Sarah entering her preserves into the competition and chatting with friends, William wandering off to look at the horse equipment, and Marlowe and Zachary browsing together. At one booth selling ribbons and hair ornaments, Zachary saw Marlowe admiring a simple blue ribbon, running her fingers over the silk reverently. "You like it?" he asked. "It is beautiful," Marlowe said. "The same color blue my mother used to wear." While Marlowe was distracted by something at the next booth, Zachary quickly purchased the ribbon and slipped it into his pocket. He would give it to her later, he decided, when they had a moment alone. The day passed pleasantly, with music and entertainment and good food. They ran into several people they knew, and Zachary noticed how Marlowe handled the introductions with growing confidence. She was charming and polite, answering questions about herself without giving away too much, and slowly winning over the townspeople who had been curious or suspicious about the mysterious young woman staying at the Preston ranch. It was late afternoon, when trouble arrived in the form of a well-dressed stranger making his way through the crowd with evident purpose. Zachary noticed him first, saw the expensive cut of his clothes and the way people instinctively moved out of his path, and felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The man's eyes were scanning the crowd as if looking for someone, and when they landed on Marlowe, who was standing at a booth examining some handmade quilts, his face lit up with predatory satisfaction. "There you are," the man said loudly, his voice carrying across the noise of the fair. "Miss Bennett, I have been searching for you for weeks." Marlowe froze at the sound of his voice, every drop of color draining from her face. She turned slowly, and Zachary saw the terror he had not seen in her eyes in weeks come flooding back. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered. Victor Harrington was a handsome man by conventional standards, tall and well-built with dark hair and aristocratic features. But there was something cold in his eyes, something cruel in the set of his mouth, that made Zachary's skin crawl. This was a man who enjoyed power and control, who saw people as possessions to be owned. "You have led me on quite a chase," Harrington said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of anger. "When you never arrived as expected, I made inquiries. It took some time to track you here to this dusty little town, but I am nothing if not persistent." Zachary moved to stand beside Marlowe, placing himself slightly in front of her. "Miss Bennett is under the protection of my family," he said clearly. "She is not going anywhere she does not want to go." Harrington's eyes shifted to Zachary, looking him up and down dismissively. "And who might you be? Some local cowboy playing at being a knight. My name is Zachary Preston. I own the ranch where Miss Bennett is employed. And I am telling you to leave her alone." A crowd was starting to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Zachary saw William pushing through the people, his young face set with determination. Sarah was there too, moving to Marlowe's other side. "Miss Bennett is promised to me," Harrington said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Her father made a binding agreement. She has obligations." "I have no obligations to you," Marlowe said, and Zachary was proud of how steady her voice was despite her obvious fear. "I know what happened to your first wife, Mr. Harrington. I will not suffer the same fate." Harrington's expression darkened. "I do not know what lies you have been told, but my late wife's death was a tragic accident, nothing more." "Was it an accident that she was covered in bruises?" Marlowe shot back. "Was it an accident that she tried to run from you and you dragged her back? Was it an accident that everyone in your town lived in fear of your temper?" "You will regret speaking to me this way," Harrington said, taking a step toward Marlowe. Zachary moved faster, putting himself fully between Marlowe and Harrington. "That is close enough. You are not touching her." "Step aside, cowboy," Harrington snarled. "This does not concern you." "Everything concerning Marlowe concerns me," Zachary said, his voice low and dangerous. He was not a violent man by nature, but he would break that principle in a heartbeat to protect Marlowe. "Now I suggest you get back on whatever horse brought you here and ride out of Laredo, because you are not welcome here, and you are certainly not leaving with her." Harrington laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can stop me? I have the law on my side. Her father signed a contract. She is legally bound to marry me." "Contracts can be broken," a new voice said from the crowd. Reverend Parker pushed his way forward, his kind face set with unusual sternness. "Especially when they were made under false pretenses and without full knowledge of the danger involved. I warned Miss Bennett about you, Harrington. I told her what you did to your wife. And I will testify to that in any court that tries to enforce this supposed agreement." "As will I," Mrs. Garcia added, appearing beside Parker. "And half this town, if it comes to that. We protect our own here, Mr. Harrington, and Marlowe is one of ours now." Zachary saw calculation in Harrington's eyes as he looked around at the growing crowd, most of whom were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Garcia's words. The man was outnumbered and outmatched, and he knew it. "This is not over," Harrington said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "Bennett will face consequences for this breach of contract. My father made that contract without my consent and without proper knowledge of your character," Marlowe said, stepping out from behind Zachary. Her hands were shaking, but she held her ground. "If he wishes to sue me for breach, he may try. But he will have to explain to a judge why he was so eager to marry his daughter to a man suspected of murdering his first wife. I do not think that will reflect well on him." Harrington's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough not to do anything with so many witnesses present. Instead, he turned on his heel and stalked away, shouldering roughly past people who did not move out of his way fast enough. The moment he was gone, Marlowe's legs gave out. Zachary caught her before she fell, sweeping her up into his arms without thinking. She was trembling violently, her breath coming in short gasps, and he held her close against his chest. "It is all right," he murmured, carrying her away from the crowd toward a quieter area near the edge of the fair. "You are safe. I have got you. You are safe." He found a bench under a tree and sat down with Marlowe still in his arms. She buried her face against his shoulder, and he felt tears soaking through his shirt. Sarah appeared with a cup of water, and William stood guard nearby, making sure no one disturbed them. "He found me," Marlowe choked out between sobs. "I thought I was safe, but he found me. What if he comes back? What if he takes me by force?" "He will not," Zachary said fiercely. He cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "Do you hear me, Marlowe? He will not take you. I will not let him. None of us will. You saw those people, how they stood up for you. You are not alone in this." "But he said he has the law on his side." "He does not," Sarah said firmly. She had sat down beside them on the bench. "Your father had no right to sign away your life without your consent, and even if there was a contract, no judge would enforce it once they learned about Harrington's history. You are an adult woman, Marlowe, not property to be traded." "She is right," Reverend Parker said, having followed them to the quiet spot. "I have some experience with legal matters from my years of ministry. If it comes to court, I would be happy to help you find a good lawyer. But I do not think it will come to that. Harrington is many things, but he is not stupid. He knows that pursuing this would bring too much scrutiny to his own actions. Men like him rely on secrecy and intimidation. When faced with public exposure, they usually retreat." Marlowe was still shaking, but her breathing had started to slow. She looked up at Zachary with red-rimmed eyes. "I am sorry. I have brought trouble to your family." "Stop that," Zachary said gently. He brushed her hair back from her face with tender fingers. "You did not bring trouble. Harrington brought trouble, and we are strong enough to handle whatever comes." "Together." The word "together" seemed to resonate with Marlowe. She searched his face for a long moment, and Zachary let her see everything he was feeling, all the worry and protectiveness, and yes, the love he had been trying so hard to hide. He was done hiding it. She needed to know that she was not just a responsibility to him, not just someone he was helping out of duty, but someone he cherished. "Together," Marlowe repeated softly, and there was wonder in her voice. They stayed there under the tree for a long while, Zachary holding Marlowe while she gradually calmed down. Sarah and William gave them space, and Reverend Parker promised to spread word around town to be on the lookout for Harrington, and to make sure he did not cause any more trouble. Eventually, Marlowe pulled back slightly, though she stayed within the circle of Zachary's arms. "I think I would like to go home now," she said. "If that is all right." "Of course," Zachary said. He stood, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her. "Let me find William and Mother, and we will head back to the ranch." The drive home was quiet, all of them processing what had happened. But it was not an uncomfortable silence. If anything, There was a sense of solidarity, of having faced a threat together and emerged intact. William sat in the back of the wagon while Marlowe sat up front between Zachary and Sarah. And at some point during the journey, she reached over and took Zachary's hand. He squeezed gently, and she did not let go for the rest of the drive. That evening, after William had gone to bed and Sarah had retired to her room, Zachary and Marlowe sat together on the porch. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They sat close together, and Marlowe had wrapped the shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting me today, for standing up to him." "You do not need to thank me for that," Zachary said. "I would do it again in a heartbeat." "I would do anything to keep you safe, Marlowe." She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight her face was ethereal, beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. "Why?" she asked. "And please do not say it is just because it is the right thing to do. I need to understand why you care so much." Zachary took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been both hoping for and dreading, the moment where he had to be completely honest and risk changing everything between them. "Because I have fallen in love with you," he said simply. "I did not plan to. I know the timing is terrible, that you are still healing and figuring out your own life. But you asked for honesty, and that is the truth. I love you, Marlowe. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you sing while you work, and the way you listen to William like what he says actually matters. I love how you have fit into this family like you were always meant to be part of it. I love everything about you, and I cannot stand the thought of anyone hurting you." Marlowe was crying again, but these were different tears. She was smiling through them, and there was no fear in her eyes now, only joy and relief and something that looked a lot like love. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that what I was feeling was just gratitude or dependence. Afraid that if I let myself care about you that way, I would be trading one trap for another. But it is not like that at all, is it? What you feel, what I feel, it is nothing like what Harrington wanted. It is not about control or possession. It is about partnership and respect and choosing each other freely." "That is exactly what it is," Zachary confirmed. His heart was pounding. "Are you saying that you care for me too?" "I am saying that I love you, Zachary Preston," Marlowe said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I love how gentle you are, how patient you have been with me. I love how you speak softly and never make me feel afraid. I love how you see me as a person, not property. I love this ranch and this family and this life we are building. And I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone." Zachary felt like he could not breathe, like his heart might burst from sheer happiness. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind or pull away, he leaned toward her. Marlowe met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Zachary kept his hands carefully on her face, cupping her cheeks tenderly, letting her control the depth and duration. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Zachary admitted. "I wish you had done it sooner," Marlowe said with a soft laugh. "Though I understand why you waited. You wanted me to be ready, to be sure. That is just one more reason why I love you." They kissed again, longer this time, and Zachary poured all his love and devotion into it, trying to show her without words how precious she was to him. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Marlowe rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked. "Harrington might come back. My father might cause trouble. There are still so many unknowns." "Now we face them together," Zachary said firmly. "Whatever comes, we handle it as a team. And when enough time has passed, when you are ready and if you want to, maybe we could talk about making this permanent, making you a Preston in name as well as in heart." Marlowe's eyes widened. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," Zachary said quickly. "Not until you are completely free of fear and doubt. Not until you have had time to build your own independent life here without any pressure from me. But yes, eventually, when the time is right, I would very much like to marry you. If you would have me." "I would," Marlowe said without hesitation. "I already know I would, but I appreciate you wanting to wait to make sure I am ready. You are right that I need more time to fully heal, to become the strong, independent woman I want to be. But know that when you do ask me properly, my answer will be yes." They stayed on the porch long into the night, talking and kissing and making plans for their future. They discussed how to handle the potential threat from Harrington, agreeing that they would consult with a lawyer in the next town over to understand Marlowe's legal position. They talked about the ranch and how Marlowe might become more involved in its operation rather than just the household duties. They dreamed aloud about what their life together might look like years down the road, and through it all, Zachary marveled at the change in Marlowe. The terrified woman who had tumbled off that stagecoach 6 weeks ago was still part of her, still showed up sometimes in moments of fear or stress. But she was no longer defined by that fear. She was becoming confident and sure of herself, able to stand up to men like Harrington and claim her own agency. He had helped with that transformation by providing safety and patience and unconditional support. But the real work had been done by Marlowe herself, by her daily choice to keep going, to keep trusting, to keep building a new life despite the trauma she had endured. She was, as he had told her, genuinely brave. The next few weeks brought their own challenges. Word of the confrontation at the fair spread quickly, and public opinion in Laredo solidly sided with Marlowe. Harold Mitchell, surprisingly, was one of the most vocal supporters, apparently having decided that protecting a woman from an abusive marriage was more important than his usual suspicion of outsiders. Zachary and Marlowe did consult with a lawyer, a shrewd woman named Catherine Wright, who had recently opened a practice in the larger town of Austin. After reviewing the facts of the case, Wright confirmed what Reverend Parker had said. Any contract Marlowe's father had signed was unenforceable given that Marlowe was an adult and had not consented to the arrangement, particularly once evidence of Harrington's dangerous nature was presented. Wright also helped Marlowe compose a letter to her father, clearly and legally establishing that she would not be marrying Harrington or returning to San Antonio, and that any attempt to force her to do so would be met with legal action. The letter was firm but not cruel, and Marlowe included a line expressing hope that someday they might reconcile, but only if her father could accept her right to make her own choices. They heard nothing from either Harrington or Marlowe's father for several weeks, and gradually the tension began to ease. Zachary remained vigilant, keeping a loaded rifle near the door and making sure someone was always around when Marlowe went into town. But as time passed without incident, they started to believe that the threat had truly passed. Meanwhile, life on the ranch continued its rhythms. Summer faded into fall, bringing cooler temperatures and the work of preparing for winter. Marlowe threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life, working alongside Zachary and William with the cattle and horses, learning to ride properly, even helping with the books and accounts. She and Sarah became even closer, often sitting together in the evenings working on a special project, a wedding quilt. It was premature, perhaps, given that Zachary had not yet formally proposed, but both women seemed to enjoy planning for that eventual happy day. As for Zachary and Marlowe, their relationship deepened and strengthened with each passing day. They were careful about propriety, mindful of Sarah and William's presence, but they stole moments together whenever they could. Morning walks to check on the cattle, Evenings on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed. Sunday afternoons by the creek that ran through the property. In these moments, they talked and kissed and simply enjoyed being together, building a foundation of friendship and trust to support the love that burned between them. 3 months after the confrontation at the fair, as autumn painted the Texas landscape in golds and browns, Zachary decided the time had come. Marlowe had fully come into her own, confident and happy, and no longer defined by her past traumas. She still had moments of fear or sadness, but they no longer controlled her life. She was ready, and so was he. He chose a Sunday afternoon, asking Marlowe to take a walk with him to their favorite spot by the creek. The trees along the water were brilliant with fall colors, and the air was crisp and clear. They walked hand in hand, talking about nothing in particular, until they reached a large, flat rock that overlooked the water. "Let's sit for a while," Zachary suggested. They settled on the rock, and Zachary felt nervous energy thrumming through him. He had given this moment so much thought, had planned what he wanted to say, but now that it was here, the words seemed inadequate. "Marlowe," he began, taking both her hands in his. "When you arrived in Laredo 4 months ago, you were running from a nightmare. You were terrified and alone and facing an uncertain future. But you were also brave and strong, even if you could not see it yourself at the time." Marlowe was watching him intently, a knowing smile starting to form on her lips. "I fell in love with you almost immediately," Zachary continued. "Not because you needed saving, but because of who you are at your core. Because of your courage and your kindness, and your determination to build a better life. Watching you heal and grow and become the woman you were always meant to be has been the greatest privilege of my life." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was precious to his family, and he hoped Marlowe would see the significance of him offering it to her. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person," Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, building a future with you. Marlowe Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Marlowe's face, but she was smiling so wide it seemed to light up her entire being. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with joy and certainty. "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and happiness and hope for their future into that kiss. Marlowe kissed him back with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, holding him close. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying at once, Marlowe held up her hand to admire the ring in the sunlight. "It is beautiful," she said. "Tell me about it." "It was my grandmother's," Zachary explained. "She gave it to my grandfather when they got married in 1820. They had 50 happy years together before he passed away. She always said this ring was a symbol of love that endured through good times and bad, through hardship and joy. I cannot think of a better symbol for what I hope we will build together." 50 years, Marlowe said softly. "What a beautiful life they must have had." "We will have a beautiful life too," Zachary promised. "Different from theirs, our own story, but just as full of love." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming aloud about their wedding and their future. Marlowe wanted a simple ceremony, just family and close friends, perhaps in the spring when wildflowers would cover the ranch. Zachary agreed immediately, knowing that after everything Marlowe had been through, she would want something intimate and meaningful rather than a big public display. When they returned to the house, hand in hand with matching smiles, Sarah took one look at them and burst into happy tears. William whooped with joy and picked Marlowe up in a spinning hug that made her laugh. The evening was spent in celebration, with Sarah breaking out a bottle of wine that had been saved for a special occasion, and everyone making toasts to the happy couple. That night, as Zachary lay in bed replaying the perfect afternoon, he heard a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find Marlowe standing there in her nightgown and robe, looking slightly bashful. "I could not sleep," she admitted. "I kept looking at the ring and thinking about how happy I am, and I just wanted to see you again, even just for a moment." Zachary smiled and stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind him for propriety's sake. "I could not sleep either," he confessed. "I keep thinking about how lucky I am that you said yes." "I am the lucky one," Marlowe said. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, studying him in the dim light of the hallway lamp. "You saved my life, Zachary. Not just by offering me a job or a place to stay, but by showing me what real love looks like. By teaching me that I deserve to be treated with respect and gentleness. By being patient and kind and everything good in this world. You saved my life too," Zachary said. "I did not even realize how lonely I had been until you arrived. How much I was just going through the motions of living rather than actually experiencing joy. You brought light and warmth and love back into this house, into my heart. We saved each other, Marlowe." They kissed again, soft and sweet, then Marlowe reluctantly stepped back. "I should get back to my room before your mother catches us and thinks we are being improper," she said with a quiet laugh. "Probably wise," Zachary agreed. "But Marlowe, I love you. I love you too," she replied. "Good night, my love." "Good night." Zachary watched until Marlowe had safely returned to her room, then went back into his own. He fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of spring wildflowers and wedding vows and a lifetime of happiness with the woman he loved. The months between the proposal and the wedding passed in a happy blur. Winter brought cold weather and occasional snow, and the ranch settled into the quieter rhythms of the off-season. Marlowe spent her time preparing for the wedding, with help from Sarah and several women from town who had adopted her as one of their own. Word of the engagement spread quickly, and the response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. Even Harold Mitchell, that early skeptic, stopped by the ranch one day to offer his congratulations and a beautiful set of dishes as an early wedding gift. The gesture touched Marlowe deeply, further cementing her sense of belonging in this community that had welcomed her. Christmas that year was particularly special, the first one Marlowe had spent truly happy and safe in years. They decorated the house with pine boughs and holly, and on Christmas morning, they exchanged simple but meaningful gifts. Zachary gave Marlowe the blue ribbon he had bought at the fair all those months ago, and she cried happy tears as she tied it in her hair. She gave him a hand-knitted scarf in his favorite color, and he wore it constantly despite William's teasing that he looked like a lovesick fool. In late February, they received a letter that surprised everyone. It was from Marlowe's father, a brief but sincere apology for his actions in trying to force the marriage with Harrington. He wrote that he had done some investigating after receiving Marlowe's letter and had been horrified to learn the truth about the man's character. He expressed regret for prioritizing money over his daughter's safety and asked if he might someday be allowed to visit and meet the man who had captured her heart. Marlowe cried when she read the letter, then asked Zachary what he thought she should do. "That is your choice entirely," he said gently. "If you want to reconcile with him, I support that. If you would rather maintain your distance, I support that too. What matters is what you need to feel safe and happy." After much thought, Marlowe wrote back, agreeing that her father could visit after the wedding, but making it clear that any ongoing relationship would depend on his continued respect for her autonomy and her choices. It was a mature, balanced response that showed how much Marlowe had grown in confidence and self-assurance. As winter gave way to early spring, the wedding preparations intensified. The ceremony would be held at the ranch itself, with Reverend Parker officiating. Mrs. Garcia was organizing the food with help from several town women. William was in charge of making sure the ranch looked its best. And Sarah was putting the finishing touches on Marlowe's dress, a simple but elegant creation in ivory silk that had been her own wedding dress, altered to fit Marlowe perfectly. The night before the wedding, Zachary stood on the porch looking out over his land, thinking about how much had changed in less than a year. This time last year, he had been lonely and overwhelmed, seeing no future beyond the endless cycle of ranch work and responsibility. Now he stood on the eve of his wedding, about to marry a woman who was his equal partner in every way, who had brought joy and purpose and love into every corner of his life. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Marlowe stepping out, wrapped in her shawl against the cool spring evening. "I thought I might find you here," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Should you not be inside? Is it not bad luck to see each other the night before the wedding?" "That is only if we see each other on the wedding day before the ceremony," Marlowe corrected with a smile. "Tonight is still allowed, and I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" "About how grateful I am," Marlowe said. She leaned against the porch railing, looking out over the same view Zachary had been contemplating. "A year ago, I was trapped in a life I did not choose, heading toward a fate that would have destroyed me. But then a traveling preacher spoke up, and a stagecoach brought me to a small town in Texas, and a lonely rancher saw a terrified woman and chose to speak softly until she felt safe." She turned to face Zachary, her eyes shining with emotion. "You changed my life, Zachary Preston. You gave me hope when I had none, safety when I was in danger, love when I thought I would never trust anyone again. Tomorrow, I get to marry my best friend, my protector, my partner in all things. How did I get so lucky?" Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I think we were both lucky," he said. "Lucky that our paths crossed when they did. Lucky that we were both brave enough to take a chance on each other. Lucky that we live in a world where sometimes, despite all the hardship and cruelty, good things happen to good people." They stood there together, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had witnessed Marlowe's terrified arrival in Laredo, that had shone down on their first conversations, their first kiss, the proposal by the creek. The same stars that would shine on their wedding day tomorrow and every day of their life together after. "I love you," Marlowe whispered. "I love you too," Zachary replied. "Now and always." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. The ranch looked beautiful, with wildflowers already starting to bloom across the grasslands just as Marlowe had hoped. Zachary's hands shook slightly as William helped him with his tie, but it was nervousness born of excitement, not doubt. As he stood before their assembled guests, friends and neighbors and family, gathered on the land he loved, Zachary felt at peace. And when Marlowe appeared, walking toward him with her hand on Sarah's arm, looking absolutely radiant in her ivory dress with the blue ribbon woven into her hair, his breath caught in his throat. She was so beautiful, so confident, so completely transformed from the frightened woman who had arrived trembling with fear. And she was choosing him, freely and joyfully, as he was choosing her. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising love and respect and partnership through whatever challenges life might bring. When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, and Zachary kissed his bride for the first time as her husband, The applause and cheers from their guests seemed to echo across the plains. The celebration that followed was filled with music and laughter and good food. Marlowe's father had indeed made the journey and was introduced to Zachary with some awkwardness, but also genuine warmth. The two men found common ground in their love for Marlowe and their desire for her happiness. And while the relationship would always carry the weight of past mistakes, there was hope for healing. As evening fell and someone started playing a fiddle, Zachary led his wife onto the makeshift dance floor that had been set up in the yard. They swayed together under the stars, and Zachary thought about the journey that had brought them here. "What are you thinking about?" Marlowe asked, her head resting against his chest. "About that day in Laredo," Zachary admitted. "About seeing you fall out of that stagecoach, so scared you could barely speak. About how I had no idea that helping you would change my entire life. Do you regret it?" Marlowe asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Not for a single moment," Zachary said firmly. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Marlowe Preston. And I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day." "Marlowe Preston," she repeated, testing out the sound of her new name. "I like it. I like being part of this family, part of this place. I like being yours and you being mine." "Always," Zachary promised, and kissed her again as the stars wheeled overhead, and their loved ones danced around them. The years that followed were good ones, filled with hard work and deep contentment. Marlowe proved to be not just an excellent homemaker, but also a skilled ranch manager, with a head for numbers and business that helped the Preston Ranch prosper. She and Zachary made decisions together as true partners, and their mutual respect and love only deepened with time. William grew up and eventually started his own horse training business on a portion of the ranch land, building a reputation as one of the best in the region. He never forgot how his brother and Marlowe had shown him what a healthy, loving relationship looked like. And when he eventually married a kind woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch, their relationship bore many of the same hallmarks of equality and respect. Sarah lived to see the births of her first 3 grandchildren, doting on them with all the love she had once poured into her own sons. Zachary and Marlowe's first child, a boy they named Henry after Zachary's father, was born in the spring of 1878. He was followed 2 years later by twin girls, Grace and Caroline, who inherited their mother's determination and their father's gentle nature. Zachary never stopped being amazed by Marlowe, by her strength and her growth, and the woman she had become. She still had moments where shadows from the past would creep in, times when fear would grip her unexpectedly. But she had learned to face those moments, to work through them with the support of her husband and family, and they no longer had the power to control her. As for Marlowe, she often reflected on how different her life had turned out from what she had once expected. If someone had told that terrified girl tumbling from a stagecoach that she would find not just safety but genuine happiness, that she would build a life filled with love and purpose, she would not have believed them. But it had happened, bit by bit, day by day, through choosing trust over fear and hope over despair. 10 years after their wedding, on an evening much like the one before they were married, Zachary and Marlowe stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard while the sun set. Marlowe leaned against her husband, his arm around her shoulders, completely at peace. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Zachary asked quietly. "If that preacher had not warned you if you had married Harrington?" "Sometimes," Marlowe admitted. "But only to remind myself how precious this life is, how grateful I am for every moment. I think I was always meant to end up here with you. All those other paths were just detours leading me home." "Home," Zachary echoed, liking the sound of that. He kissed the top of her head. Yes, you came home, and I am so grateful every day that you stayed. Henry called out then, asking his father to come look at a frog he had found by the water trough. Zachary laughed and jogged down the steps to admire his son's discovery, while the twins demanded their mother's attention to settle a dispute about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. As Marlowe watched her family, her heart full to bursting, she thought about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. About fear and courage, about loss and love, about the incredible power of choosing to trust again after betrayal. She thought about a lonely rancher who had spoken softly to a terrified stranger, who had offered kindness without expecting anything in return, who had been patient and gentle and everything good in the world. And she gave thanks, as she did every day, for the journey that had brought her here, to this place of safety and joy and love without end. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, a fitting end to another perfect day in a life filled with them. And as night fell over the Preston ranch, the stars came out to shine down on a family built on love, trust, and the simple, profound act of speaking softly, until someone finally felt safe enough to believe in happiness again.